I was born in France, but my parents are Americans. And I grew up in Colorado. My father was a lawyer and loved to camp, and I was a skier and mountain climber. My parents liked to travel. So I was lucky as a kid, and we went to Stonehenge and the pyramids in Mexico and Greece and Turkey and Hawaii and stuff like that. And I've always been interested in archaeology, Atlantis, UFOs, cryptozoology, psychic phenomenon, all that kind of stuff. And I left, I went to the University of Montana for a while, and then eventually I went to Taiwan as an English teacher. And ultimately I went to Thailand and Burma and Calcutta and Kathmandu. I wanted to go to Tibet and climb in the Himalayas. Edmund Hillary, one of my heroes. After that, I traveled through the Middle East, through Afghanistan and Iran, Turkey, Syria, went to Egypt, traveled through Africa for a couple of years, returned to India and Asia and China, back to the United States, then started going to Central America and South America, and then also to Australia and Pacific Islands. And I am the author of a number of books, and one of my main interests really is megalithic technology, megalith building, and ancient technology. And that's pretty much what we're going to see today. We're going to see, we'll start out with some megaliths around the world, and then we're going to look at some unusual skulls and possible alien craniums and things like that, and then finally some ancient technology. This is what parts of Misan look like today, and this is right on near the border of what was North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and a lot of the fighting in the Vietnam War was around this area, and even this whole site was bombed. Now, who built Misan? Here's Da Nang over here. Misan's actually over here. It was the Kam people. They're the ones who are attributed to these buildings. Now, the Kam were a mysterious seafaring people. And in fact, we get the name Kampuchea and Cambodia. It comes from these people. And this was their main capital, was this island just off of Vietnam. And if you go to Da Nang, there's a museum for the Kam. And you see the Kam people were really Hindus who later became Buddhists. And this is a picture of Shiva. Notice how he's got very kind of wide, thick lips and a wide nose. He doesn't really look very much like a Southeast Asian today or a Vietnamese. Here's another Kam guy. He's got curly, dark hair. He also has a wide nose and thick lips. There's a lot of good statues. This is also a statue that was there at Misan. This is supposed to be Shiva. Notice the third eye in the middle of his forehead. And he's wearing his hair in this top knot method, which is also what sadhus in India still wear today. The holy men who go underground, they have very long hair and they tie a knot up in their head. And that's also what the statues at Easter Island have their hair like this too. This is also a statue, a Kam statue at Misan. And he's got the wide nose and the thick lips and stuff. And in fact, he looks very Mayan. And if you were to show a picture, this statue, to somebody in Mexico or something, they would say, oh yeah, that's a Mayan statue right there. But it's actually from Vietnam. Here's another Kam statue. He's like Kon-Tiki. He's got a big, thick mustache and a beard, and he's also got the long earlobes. Always depictions of Buddha always have him with very, very long earlobes. And here's a woman who's also a Kam. She's probably depicting Parvati, the consort of Shiva. And at Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, and it was really Hindu temples that were later recarved into Buddhist temples. And they have the keystone cuts there and the clamps. And when I was there the first time in 1998, Japanese archaeologists were so excited that they had found these metal clamps there at Angkor Wat, just like at Tiwanaku and at Misan and in Egypt. And at Angkor Wat too, you have these, what appear to be these monolithic doors and windows, very similar to what's at Tiwanaku. This is a megalithic movement from an island off Sumatra called Nias. And this is a photo taken about 1915 by the Dutch. And this is a rare photo. So you can see how, yeah, it is possible to manhandle some giant megalith. In this case, they're probably moving some megalith that was somewhere else, and the chief said, well, we got to move it over here now. And so the whole, tribe came together and built this whole cage and moved it. Also in Indonesia, on the island of Sulawesi, is a very oddball valley called Bata Valley. And it has some very unusual statues that we're going to see. This is Sulawesi, Bata Valley in the middle of this part. It's a remote area, and in fact, roads were only built to Bata Valley about 10 years ago. And this is what Bata Valley looks like when you get there. It's got these oddball megaliths in it. It's a gold mining area. And in fact, the Indonesians claim this is where the earliest form of rice was created. And that primitive rice and rice fields were all started here in Bata Valley. As you walk around Bata Valley, you start to see these unusual kind of tiki-type statues. They're cut out of granite, and they're just in farmers' fields. Archaeologists say that they're 6,000 years old or so. They don't know who built them. The people who live in Bata Valley, they don't know anything about them. They don't really do anything with them. They're just sitting out there. And this is one of the largest ones to come up to, and we'll look at him real carefully. You see here the way his nose is, and even finely cut parts of him. Let's look at it here. Yeah, I mean, even his eyes and his nose, I mean, this statue is supposedly 6,000 years old, but it's just, it's perfectly cut. And once again, it would seem that power tools are being used to cut these statues, and they make them virtually indestructible. The other thing that's at Bata Valley, which is very strange, are these huge granite jars. And they're these vessels. They're also just out in the middle of people's fields. They don't know who built them. They don't know what they were for. They're cut out of a single granite boulder. They're hollowed out, and they're made into like a giant wine amphora or something like that. People just have them. They just leave them there in their fields, and you walk around and you look at them. There's hundreds of them. You can see this one. It's broken and very narrow cut. Just the walls of these granite jars and things. And to make these would seem to be very difficult. Although, again, if you have power tools, it wouldn't be hard to do at all. And there's a place just like this in north-central Laos called the Plain of Jars. And it also has all of these granite jars that are just hollowed out and sitting in the plain, and archaeologists are baffled by it. They have no idea who did it or why. So this is kind of the same thing. It's all just, archaeologists are baffled all by this. Also, in northern Cambodia is this site called Preah Vihear. It's like a Machu Picchu on top of a mountain right on the Cambodian-Thai border. And it's only been the last few years that tourists could go here because the Thai army and the Cambodian army were fighting over this site. And it's on the edge of a cliff. It also has huge lichen patches. It has monolithic doorways in it. It's perfectly fitted blocks of granite, huge lichen patches. It's quite an astonishing sight. And you also have keystone cuts here too, just like also in Angkor Wat. So here we have also the same T-shaped cuts here at Preah Vihear, like it. This is the same kind that are at Tiwanaku. And by the way, mainstream archaeologists are saying there is no connection. There can't be a connection. There's absolutely no connection between any of these sites. And this is what they have to say, because this site cannot be connected to what's in Peru and Bolivia or even in Egypt. And what they would have to say is that these people are just utterly independently doing this on their own and creating it. And there can't be a connection. We'll go back now to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. And archaeologists are looking at these H blocks and the buildings there and trying to reconstruct it. And architects, and they're looking at that. You have also the blocks of stone that are, again, heavily articulated. I mean, this really has to be done with power tools, all these small little lapping and little shells and stuff. I mean, this is not something that you're going to do with a stone hammer in your hand. You have to have power tools for this. And again, you're cutting granite when you do it. And part of these stones are built with these famous H blocks. And they're like these Lego blocks that are very uniform and very articulated and fitted together. And so you have these there. It's like some factory with a CAD computer program was just cutting these blocks, and there would be granite, and then spewing them out, and then later they're to be fitted together. So let's have a look at how that would work. So you have these blocks. They're all very uniform. They fit together like a Lego block. And then they have other blocks that can be inserted behind them, and they all lock in together, and they're going to be this ultimately some giant wall of highly articulated, fitted granite blocks. And I have to thank Eric von Daniken for this animation, which is great. So it's showing you really how complicated and sophisticated this whole thing is. It just can't really be done by primitive means of just bashing things out. You've got to have power tools to do this. So anyway, some other artists' impressions of what it all looks like. And here we go. At the museum at Tiwanaku, they have this artist depiction, and you have the H blocks and other ones here, and they're fitted together. Here we are. Here's the keystone cuts. They're pouring molten metals to fit in there. But once again, you know, it's a mixture of super high tech with very primitive. And you know, the guy's over here with his campfire, you know, melting some metals, and you know, they're wearing these simple cotton tunics. You know, they're not dressed in some fancy way or anything like that. So yeah, you know, and this is what the mainstream has to say. Yeah, you know, these guys are just a bunch of primitive guys. They don't know writing. They don't know the wheel or anything. But you know, they're going to do some pretty amazing stuff. So also near to Tiwanaku is a pyramid, and this is a man-made pyramid. You can see it from Tiwanaku, but it's not recognized as an authentic archaeological site. And the Bolivian government, you know, they've turned a blind eye to this. And it's because there's a village here, and that village is looting this pyramid. And they're doing their own private excavation of this pyramid site and taking artifacts, and they're selling it. And in Bolivia's, you know, kind of doesn't have a lot of rules and regulations, and stuff like this can happen. And I asked our guide, he was the one telling us about this, and I said, wow, you know, let's go there. We gotta see this thing. And we were able to drive part of the way, but we only, you know, we got up this dirt road, and we could see the village right there. He stopped the minibus, and he said, we can't go any farther than this. He said, you know, the villagers will not let us into the village. And, you know, they privately, you know, keep everyone out because they're looting the site, essentially. Now, the things that came out of this pyramid are some interesting objects. One is the Potiki monolith. The Potiki monolith is a granite statue that's 3-4 feet high, and it's been broken, and it's got a turban on. And along the side of his thigh, on both sides, is Sumerian writing. So Sumerian writing is on this granite monolith. Sumerian experts have looked at it, and they've said, yeah, this is Sumerian writing. Today, this monolith is in the Gold Museum, the Museum of Precious Metals in La Paz, but it's not on display. So, I mean, there are photos of it, and when we went there with Ancient Aliens once, because Ancient Aliens paid them, they brought it out of this vault, and we were all able to examine it and photograph it, and it is part of an episode of Ancient Aliens. And here's some of the Sumerian symbols that are on the Potiki monolith. The Sumerians wrote in hieroglyphs. They had a number of languages and written scripts. They had hieroglyphic symbols, and they also had cuneiform writing. Now, what is also in the museum, the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, and this is Bolivia's official museum, is this. And this is called the Fuente Magna Bowl. And the Fuente Magna Bowl, it is on display, although you're not supposed to take photos of it. But, you know, who's going to not take a photo, you know, when they're there? And it has Sumerian writing on it, too. It has cuneiform writing right here, and it's a ceramic bowl. And it has Sumerian hieroglyphic writing on the other side. And in fact, here we go. We'll look at it here. Here's the hieroglyphic writing. Here's the cuneiform writing. And this is the guy who found it. In fact, Maximiliano, he lived near that pyramid that I was showing you, and he actually found the Fuente Magna Bowl in 1960. And he just used it in his yard. He put it in his backyard, and he used it to feed his pigs with. And then one day, a priest noticed what he was, this bowl and all that, and he thought it was a curious bowl, and he thought, you know, there's something, you know, this bowl needs to be in a museum. And what they did was they traded him a house for it. And he got like a, you know, kind of a new mud brick house, and then they brought the bowl to La Paz. But that was 1960. And for all those years, they just kept it out of display. And then finally, around 2005, they put the bowl on display. And it is, now if you go to the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, you will see it. This is something that cannot be there. In mainstream archaeology, this is an impossible artifact. It simply cannot be there. It is a time bomb. This is a minefield in archaeology. There cannot be a Sumerian bowl in Bolivia. I mean, this upsets all of mainstream archaeology and turns it on its head, this thing. And it's officially in Bolivian Museum. And I'm convinced that if this bowl had been found in Peru, it would not be in a museum. Bolivia is something of a rogue nation. They don't want other countries telling them what to do, and that's a good thing, I think. But in Peru is more, you know, they're going to do what the mainstream archaeologists tell them. And if this was in a museum in Peru, you know, American archaeologists or others would go there and they would say, take this off display. This is not, you know, this is not something you should have in your museum, because it can't be there. I mean, Sumerians cannot have gone to ancient Tiwanaku and have built it. And in fact, this would, in a sense, show that the Anunnaki had been there and were the builders of this. And in fact, you know, this Sumerian writing, this is from 4,000, 5,000 BC. So it's, yeah, this is just something that cannot be there. And in fact, National Geographic or some other major archaeological magazine, they will never, ever talk about it. They can't. It just upsets everything. And it will only be, all they can do is ignore it. And just ignore it, never talk about it. But it's, you know, shows like Ancient Aliens where you actually will see, you know, artifacts like this. And it's in a museum. It's completely real. This is some of the Sumerian hieroglyphs that you might see. So at Tiwanaku, if you go to the museum, this is a ceramic. This is what the Aymara Indians, people who look like around there today. And it's said that Aymara is supposedly a Sumerian. They're speaking ancient Sumerian. He's got the big nose. He's wearing a turban, typical Bolivian type Indian. But these are guys from Tiwanaku too. Like, look at this guy. He looks very, very Oriental, like he's some Chinese guy. And then the guy up here, he also, he's some Tiwanaku guy too, but he's got a thick mustache and a beard. He's a Tiwanaku guy too, but you know, he looks like he's from Mediterranean or, you know, some Phoenician guy or something. This is a display that's at the museum there at Tiwanaku of some of the unusual craniums. And in fact, they've taken this off display. You cannot see it now. And what you would see there would be some of these guys, elongated skulls, like this one. He's got unusually elongated skull. And now we'll see more of that. So let's go to Peru now and to the desert areas of Peru. We're going to go to Paracas right here, and also this town here, Ica. It's the main capital. This has a major museum. Nazca, all the famous lines, is down here. Lima, the capital of Peru, is up here. And this is very much a desert area of Peru. And you get here, because it is so dry, you're going to get a lot of these unusual craniums, including like this guy. He's got an elongated skull. And these guys. And they're all from Paraca, from Ica, people with extremely elongated skulls, easily double the size of our skull, of our cranium. And I mean, some of these guys look pretty unusual. There are ways, archaeologists know this, of taking babies and binding their head, and while they're still infants and the plates in their head haven't fused together yet, you bind the skull and then you force it into this elongated shape, but then it's still going to fuse up here, and there's various problems and stuff with that. This guy here from Chongos, he's one of the more extreme elongated skulls. Not the kind of guy you want to meet in a dark alley, probably. And those skulls are coming here from this, in many cases, from this pyramid that's a ruined pyramid called the Chongos Pyramid. Here's a close-up. So a lot of these skulls are coming out of here. So again, some of these guys, I mean, some of them have kind of boxy heads, and you know, there's still hair on them. They're very well preserved. These are absolutely real. The Peruvian archaeologists and everybody, I mean, these are official museums that we're taking them out of. Now, this skull is particularly unusual, and this may be really evidence of an alien, some kind of alien skull, because of the way that he's an elongated cone-head guy too. But what's happened here is that the seams at the top of his head are not the way a normal human's head would come together and ultimately knit, and as you become an adult, your skull is going to be complete and will stop growing. So with this guy, yeah, what he has is this just one seam here on the top of his skull, without the other seams going in the back. So the idea is here that are there some people who are naturally have these elongated heads, and they're not being manipulated. They're not. It's not a binding technique like foot binding or something like that. They naturally look this way, and that is the big question. And even the people who do head binding and this cranial deformation, shall we call it, you know, they wonder if, okay, some people are doing this artificially, but why are they doing it? They're trying, at the very least, they're trying to imitate other people. And they're saying that, yeah, you know, the gods, the ancient kings, where they all look like this, so we want to look like them. And so even small infants or fetuses that also have these elongated heads, this is the kind of thing they're looking for. You have other techniques too that are done, which is called tree panning. And tree panning is where you're using a saw or a drill and you're cutting a hole in the head. And we don't exactly know why they were doing this. It kind of is like brain surgery of some sort. And this guy, this is from a museum in Lima, and he had a gold plate put in his head. And he survived all this. And later his skull grew over the gold plate, and he lived for many years after he'd had this big cut in his head. You have also many of the skulls. Not everybody has these elongated skulls. I mean, some of them are, some of them aren't. And many of them have red hair, which is an unusual thing too. Also in this area is what's called the Candlestick of the Andes. This is this huge sort of candlestick thing that's etched into a mountain that can be seen from the ocean and easily seen from the air as well. It would seem to be some kind of indicator saying to either ancient mariners and to even people in airships, yeah, this is the place right here. And even that, Tiwanaku or something it's over that way. As you go farther south, then you get into the famous Nazca Plain with all of its many lines and figures and things like that. And tomorrow, Eric Van Don is going to show you a lot more about this, and he has some great video and stuff of it. These elongated skulls are also in Mexico, and the ancient Olmecs who lived in central Mexico, they had the elongated skulls too. They were doing all this. And there's some Olmec guys from Comacalco. This is what they look like, these big eyes, also wide noses, thick lips. They have elongated heads. And you have some of these guys, too, who have their heads smashed in, and we call them pumpkin heads. And so rather than having a elongated skull, they have this smashed out pumpkin skull. This one is from the museum in Mérida in the Yucatan, and would be some Mayan or Olmec or Toltec skull. So this is the kind of binding that you would use on an infant's head. Really, you want to do this to very young, babies who are just, 6 months old or something like that. And then you do it gradually throughout their years up to probably around the time they're 6 or 7 or 8 years old or something like that. So that would be the techniques. Now the Olmecs were a group that were completely unknown to archaeologists until 1940. And up to that time, mainstream archaeologists were saying that the Mayans were the oldest our civilization group in Mesoamerica and in Mexico. But then archaeologists realized that there was this other civilization before them. And they didn't have a name for them. They called them the Olmecs, the rubber people. And in 1940, they brought archaeologists from all over the world to Mexico City and had this big conference where they announced this new culture. And they called it the Olmecs. And the Olmecs are these pre-Mayans. They're a megalithic culture. They have these giant basalt heads called colossal heads. They weigh about 20 tons each. They're found in Guatemala. They're found on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, particularly in the oil area. They're buried in swamps. Most of these heads had to be dug out with bulldozers and stuff. There's a lot of oil exploration in that area. They're in Guatemala too, where they just would find them in sugarcane fields and uncover them. Huge basalt boulders and things like that. Many of them look, again, very African, in fact. Some of them are very, very finely cut. Notice the thick lips and the wide nose here. He's wearing some kind of strange like helmet or turban. He looks very African, really. And also like the Cam guys in Vietnam. And again, mainstream is saying like, oh yeah, no, these are just American Indians. Yeah, they look like Africans, but they're not Africans. And they were buried. I mean, people didn't find these until 1930s when they started digging up and bulldozing through these swamps and stuff in the Tabasco area, particularly of eastern Mexico. And what they found there too was that cities like La Venta, which they think was the capital city of the Olmecs, that it was a pre-planned city, that it had a very sophisticated irrigation and water systems were all part of it. And the whole area of the Olmecs, the heartland area, is what's called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. It's the narrowest part of Mexico. So Comacalco is up here in La Venta, we were just looking at. But this area here too, on the Pacific, is also an Olmec area. And Monte Alban, which is a city, it's also an Olmec city, there they cut the top of this mountain off. So the Olmecs were on the Pacific and Atlantic side. And they could control both trade on both oceans. This is an Olmec statue too. This is at Jalapa, one of the big Olmec sites and Olmec museums. And look at this guy. He's got a false beard, just like Egyptians would have. And even his headdress is very much a sort of Egyptian cowl kind of thing that Egyptians famously wore. He's an Olmec too. He's an Olmec statue, and he's holding a rubber ball. These are the guys who invented the ball game. And the rubber ball games that we use today for basketball and baseball and football and all the ball games really started here. This is an Olmec head too, and this is an unusual one. And mainstream archaeologists noticed this, that something was going on here. This is a basalt head, weighs about 20 tons, but it's got all these dish marks on it. And archaeologists also thought this was strange. Somebody, with like a power tool, just was defacing this. I mean, they were just decided they had a power tool, and they didn't like this guy anymore, and they just stick in their power tool, their grinder or whatever, and they're just dishing out dish marks on it, just because they could. And they're defacing it. And archaeologists were baffled by how and why people would do this. It just didn't make sense. The same thing was going on in the back of a statue that's also an Olmec statue in the Villahermosa Park in the same area. And it's like somebody was taking their power drill and just dishing out little drill spots and just playing with their power tools, just because they could, practicing with all the tools and stuff that they have. At Comacalco, which is an Olmec site and was later became a Mayan site, this display was there. And I thought it was a really cool display, and it's showing all these different ceramics and figurines and stuff that they had found at Comacalco. And it was all pretty bizarre. I mean, here's a kind of standard-looking Olmec guy over here. Then you have this strange guy, and it's a standard Olmec guy. But then you have guys like this guy here, looking very Chinese. This guy up here also looks very Oriental. All these different, this guy here, all these weird guys. Some of them have the famous, they call it the Olmec frown. They have taken this off display. You cannot see this there anymore. Again, archaeologists went there and they just thought this was just too weird to have in the museum. And they told him, take this off display. You know, it just looks too strange for tourists to look at. So you won't see this anymore. This is also an Olmec votive offering made out of jade. It was found at La Venta, but today it's at the big museum in Mexico City. And these are what are called jade celts. This is all jade. These are these Olmec figurines. They have elongated skulls. They look kind of Oriental, but also sort of Negroid at the same time. And there's a kind of early writing and inscriptions on the back of these celts. And in 1999, they brought from Beijing, China, they bought the top epigrapher on Shang Chinese glyphs to look at these glyphs here. And Shang Chinese glyphs are the earliest of all Chinese writing, going back to 4,000, 5,000 BC. And he said that the glyphs on the back of these jade celts was Shang Chinese writing. That's what he said. You also have these deformed heads in Egypt, and Akhenaten and Nefertiti also had these elongated heads. This is one of their daughters, Meritaten, and she's a cone head too. She's got this big elongated head, and this is not the result of incest or anything like that. This is a purposefully done elongated of the head, or else they just look like this. And we find this too in the Kurdistan, in the Kurds and Yazidis. You still find this. In Malta, they also have these elongated heads. And even Tutankhamun, he was a cone head too. And statues in his own tomb depict him as having this elongated head. Although you never hear about it when you read all these articles about Tutankhamun stuff. They never talk about him having this elongated head. Also, a trunk in Tutankhamun's tomb contained 12 boomerangs. And they're on display at the Cairo Museum. And the Egyptians also used boomerangs too. So boomerangs were used all over the world. Tutankhamun he loved boomerangs. And boomerangs have been found in Poland and in Denmark and in Florida, also in the American Southwest. If you go to Iraq, and these are the famous Ubaid figures from northern Iraq, from an excavated town called Ubaid. And they have what archaeologists call the coffee bean eyes. They also have these elongated heads. These are authentic. They're ceramic figurines. And archaeologists think that, yeah, these are the Anunnaki guys, the coffee bean eyes, elongated heads, and I mean, this is totally real. So, yeah, we're now looking at that, and these are Sumerians. So these are the Sumerian figures of these cone heads, and then, of course, we have the Sumerian writing at Fuente Magnable at Tiwanaku. Even in ancient China, they depict many of the Taoist immortals were depicted as having these big elongated heads, some of them pretty extreme, and the pumpkin heads as well. And in China, you don't get a lot of skeletal material because you need to really preserve these ancient skulls and stuff. You need a really dry environment. Korea too, excavations there, they've found these elongated skulls. And even the Chinook Indians near Seattle, they were famous for this too, having these pointed heads and elongated heads. And it's something they were doing to manipulate. The island of Vanuatu also is famous for having the elongated heads and things like that. And they're doing that just up until today. There's still some island of Vanuatu where they're still elongating little kids' heads. And so we know that that the heads can be manipulated on little babies. We know that. There's no question of that. But it's why they're doing it and whether some people actually naturally have these elongated heads. This is from the northern Congo in Africa. This was a photo taken by a Dutch anthropologist about 1920. This little kid, his head is bound. He's going to be a conehead. And this is what a baby whose head has been bound as an infant would look like. There's just people are doing this all over the world, and to say the least, this is an unusual thing to do. But once again, mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, there's no connection between any of these people. They're all doing it completely independently for no real reason that they can think of. And there's absolutely no connection between any of these cultures and this worldwide head binding that's going on in the coneheads. This is an interesting thing. Let's just go the other way to small mini people. This was the Pedro Mountain mummy, which was discovered in 1930 in Wyoming. And these prospectors were out there. This thing's it's about 1.5 feet high. He was in a meditative posture. These prospectors were dynamited this cliff looking for veins of gold and stuff. And what suddenly emerged was this small cave, and this little man was sitting there in a meditative, like lotus position. And they took photos of him. They brought him to Chicago. There they x-rayed him. And I mean, he's totally real, only he's this tiny miniature person. And in fact, it was said by people who know a lot of are experts in yoga positions that he's in a special yoga position that's has a name and everything. And I'm not really familiar exactly what that one would be. He vanished. And in 1950, he was sold to somebody who said, yeah, I'll buy that, and, he's cool, how much do you want? And after that, it was never seen again. Nobody knows where it is. I mean, apparently somebody bought him to get him off out of the mainstream view and make sure he wasn't in a museum. And today he's completely missing, and that's why there's a $10,000 reward for this guy. The salmon ruins in New Mexico, they also found these slabs which had elephants on them. So that's interesting. We'll go real quickly now to Bogota in Colombia. We were just there, and there's some unusual things there. It's starting in the 1930s. They began excavating. They started finding all these giant statues that were there. Weird kind of stuff, many of it very Egyptian, very Olmec. Just buried in these mountain jungle areas. It's a gold mining area. A lot of these guys had kind of gorgon, big teeth and vampire teeth and stuff like that. Others, they're holding unusual things. They have collars and stuff. Finally made granite blocks, weird buildings. Again, giant basalt sarcophagi. All of it just buried. This is what the area looks like right now. There's dolmens. Here are these strange things. Here, look at this guy. Very similar to Bada Valley with his eyes and his nose. Very finely cut. I mean, this again, it would be only done with power tools on very hard granite blocks. This is what it looks like, dolmens and things. You see these guys. Weird looking guys. Very strange. Some of them have oddball things on their backs, like jetpacks or something like that. And here's a woman, also very well made. She's wearing this oddball hat. This guy, he was a ceramic. They call him the spaceman. He's a cool looking guy. So apparently this is what these guys look like. They were making this stuff at San Agustin and Tierra Dentro there in Western Colombia. The Gold Museum in Bogota has many of the gold artifacts that came out of this area, like this guy. Some are some pretty interesting, futuristic, sci-fi looking dudes. This guy's, I call him the fireman. Seems to have a big mustache and stuff. There's big gold sun discs and stuff like that was at the Coricancha. Even things that look like big saw blades and stuff like that. Gold is too soft to actually make machines, although this is some kind of gold alloy. When you have a lot of gold, you can use it as an alloy. And also, even crystal artifacts and jade artifacts that are drilled through quartz crystal. So, and to drill through a quartz crystal like that would require power tools and drills and things like that to drill through the very difficult quartz. This guy here, he's also from that area. He's a cone head. He's got the elongated head, just like we were seeing in Egypt and stuff. The same people. This is like Olmecite. Of course, mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh no, you know, these are some isolated people just doing all this on their own, being weird. This guy's cool, ceramic, looks quite oriental. And when you go to and there in the Gold Museum is a display of these gold airplanes. Just like Duncan's wearing one now, and Eric Von Donick, and they have these. I mean, they look like gold airplanes. Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this, and they're saying, oh, well, they're flying fish, or, you know, they're bees, or they're birds or something. But birds don't have tails like this. And, you know, there's literally about 40 of these things on display. But you know what? I mean, they depict flying fish, too. I mean, here's a flying fish as a gold pendant. So they can do that, but they've got these gold airplanes. And the whole idea that they had flight, if you read the Ramayana, and Eric's going to talk a lot about this tomorrow, this is at the Bangkok airport. This is Rama on his flying chariot of the gods, going some places. And to have flight, you need metals, you need machines, you need electricity. And they had electricity in ancient times, we know that. They had machines, like the Antikythera device, which was found in 1900 in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. And in fact, it wasn't until the 1950s that American archaeologists started examining the Antikythera device, which is in the Athens Museum today. And they said, yeah, this is more complicated than any Swiss clock. They had never imagined that the Greeks had anything like this, these complicated machines and cog devices and stuff. And things like this too, which is at Dendera. This is totally authentic. You have these cables coming out of this thing. They're attached to this some kind of device. It looks like some kind of light bulb. You have the serpent here as like a filament. These are Jed columns associated with Osiris. You have some baboon Thoth god here with a knife. You have these mini guys here doing stuff. I mean, this whole scene is pretty bizarre, and it seems to depict an electrical device. And this is completely real. So mainstream archaeologists have to explain this too. There has to be an explanation, and it can't be that it's an electrical device, because in ancient time, well, they didn't have electricity, so it has to be something else. Here's their explanation. This is a lotus flower here, and this is the aroma of the flower. That's the explanation. Also, now at the Abydos temple, which is nearby, up on this high lintel, which is about 40 feet off the ground, is these things carved into it, and this is totally real too. Something that looks like a helicopter, other things here that look like submarines. There's something here that looks like a jet. This also looks like some kind of jet here. This is completely real. And now the mainstream has to explain this too. And their explanation, which is not a bad one actually, is that one of these things is that two hieroglyphs are superimposed on each other. And there was a hieroglyph there, and then after 1,000 years, the priest came and they chiseled another hieroglyph on it, and they plastered it up, but then that plaster fell down. So it's two hieroglyphs together. And that does explain a couple of them, but I've been told by Egyptologists that this one here, that looks like this little jet plane, that they don't have an explanation for that one. That's not any hieroglyph they know or see. It's unique. So yeah, the whole idea of flight that people had, I mean, and just like today, we have spaceships, we have airplanes, but we still have ships. Most cargo is still trafficked by ship across oceans. And we have this thing from Panama. This is also what it's called a zoomorphic glyph. It's about a 4-inch long gold pendant. But it seems to be, it's like a monster, but it seems to be a backhoe. It's like heavy equipment. And it has a stone on it. He's got a breastplate in the front of him. But it's this whole part back here. So it's called a zoomorphic glyph in the sense that it's like heavy machinery some kind of backhoe or something, but it's been turned into essentially a monster, which then became a piece of jewelry. They found things in tombs. This is actually a thing from the Dasani Monastery, ancient Chinese records. They have stories of flight. The Kebra Nagast, which is from Ethiopia, also has stories of King Solomon and his son flying between Israel and Ethiopia and things like that. And of course, the whole thing of these flying discs. Discs that are made to fly through the air, and then here you have these guys on it. And I can see that, yep, my time is up, so I'm going to end it right there. And thanks, everybody.